So great to be with you today. And so I want to make sure that we have you out of here at 1 o'clock. That's the game plan, just to let you know. I think it was right to give Diane a standing ovation today when I was at the table with her and she said that they co-founded the ministry in 1999. And I thought, oh my gosh, she's been in it longer than my wife and I've been in it. We co-founded our ministry in 2000. And so it's a lot of years that have gone by. In fact, last year I hired a young lady, and for the first time I was doing the orientation, and I said, what do you know about the history of our ministry, about the history of Water Garden? She goes, well, I don't know. And I said, well, do you know when it was started? And she said, well, I think that was before I was born. I was like, do you really want this job? Because you are not gonna... Anyway, yeah, but it was true. A college graduate who we'd started the ministry before she was even born. So we had a lady who wandered through our community for a number of years. Actually, it was three years that she would wander pushing a grocery cart. And this was in the city of Joplin. She'd wander down the streets. She would sleep upright in the trolley depots. She was too frightened to lie down and sleep, so she was always sleeping in trolley depots. She wouldn't go into any place of service. She was kind of off the grid and out there, if you know what I mean. And so I had a board member on a snowy night who called me, and he said, James, you know that woman, her name was Mary. Do you know Mary? I said, yeah. He said, if you could find her, my wife and I would love to bring her into our house tonight. It was cold and snowy. And so my wife and I thought, well, we'll go give a look, see if we can find her, but we're sure that she's going to say no to this because she doesn't go in any place. And we got in our minivan and we started driving down the streets, got down the main street. We're looking in the trolley depots, trying to find Mary, and we can't seem to track her down. Finally, we come across her. She's sitting under the awning of the local library that's on Main Street in Joplin. It was at that time. And underneath the awning, sitting in this chair is Mary. She's got all of the coats and the and sleeping bags and blankets, and I mean everything's piled around her. And all you can see is her face. We pull the van up. We leave the van running because we're going to go down the sidewalk and we're going to say, Mary, we've got a friend who'd like to keep you tonight. Are you interested in going? And she's going to say, no, right? We're just sure of it. So we leave the van running. We go down and Mary, hey, Mary, you've got a friend. Would you like to go and stay at their house tonight? It's a stranger. Unbelievably, she says, yes. We're like, oh, wow. Okay, what do we do? Well, let's take all the stuff off of you and put it in the empty grocery cart that you've been pushing around town. So we start taking all the blankets and the coats and all the stuff off of her. And then we help her up off of this little brown folding metal chair that she's sitting in. And now the grocery cart is full. It's heaping with all of this stuff. And we take the folding metal chair and I push it on top of the grocery cart. And about that time, my wife has Mary in arm and she's walking down the sidewalk going to the van. And she turns around and looks at me while I'm holding onto this grocery cart. And and she says, push that to the mission, honey. And I'm like, oh yeah, we're not gonna get this stuff in the van. This grocery cart's not gonna fit in the van. So I'm suddenly finding myself on a cold, snowy night in downtown Joplin on Main Street, pushing a grocery cart down, hopping off the curb, trying to step through the puddles. I remember car lights coming down the road, and I felt like, boy, everybody's just staring at me. And I remember, I don't know if I said it out loud, but I either said it out loud or I thought it, but it was, gosh, God, I came down here to help a lady. I didn't come down here to trade places with her. But boy, as soon as I said it, it was like a message hit my heart. Because that's what he did. He did come down to trade places. Here I had traded places with her. And about that time, Marcia had gotten Mary in the same seat where I was sitting just minutes before, and she drives by, and I look up, and there she goes. I'm like, wow, that's so strange. Here I'm pushing your stuff, and you're in my vehicle. And I remember saying, how did this happen, right? How did this happen? But that four-word question, how did this happen, is a good question. Because it's a question that you and I are asking often, I think, when we're meeting people who are struggling in chronic poverty, chronic homelessness, issues of addiction, struggles from the past, trauma. How did this happen, right? And it brings me to the idea of things not being the way that they ought to be. Wouldn't you agree with me that in the work that you and I are doing in engaging people struggling in poverty, that you would say, things are not as they ought to be? There's one author who talks about justice. He says, truth pertains to what is, justice as what ought to be. Does that make sense? Truth pertains to what is. You and I are seeing a lot of the truth of what is, but we're not really necessarily seeing what ought to be. It's what you and I are working for. That's the destination. See, we talk a lot about a road to justice. Now, it's not to say that every aspect of poverty is born out of injustice, but I will tell you there is much injustice that is holding people in poverty. There is much injustice that is perpetuating poverty. And so when we talk about the road to justice, how are we going to get there? That's what I want to talk about today. How are we going to get there? Well, I know, and I think you do, that if you're going to get down the road anywhere, it requires fuel, does it not? It requires some fuel. So what is the fuel that we need to get down the road to justice? The fuel is compassion. We've got to have compassion. Now, I want you today to think of compassion as an emotion. It's not something that you conjure up here. It's something that's elicited actually from here. Because I believe that all people made in the image of a compassionate God have the ability to feel compassion when they come face to face with the truth of what is rather than what ought to be. And when that happens, something rises up in us and is the fuel that compels us to do something. Compassion is that emotion that compels us to do something. Jesus felt compassion, and it compelled him to do things. We see it in Matthew 14, Matthew 20, Mark 6. Throughout the New Testament, Jesus felt compassion, and it caused him to do something, like to teach, or to feed, or to touch in one scripture, to heal in another scripture. Compassion caused him to do things, right? If we have fuel of compassion and we've got a destination we're calling justice or things as they ought to be, what do we need in the middle of this? We need a vehicle, because you can have fuel in a destination, but if you don't have a vehicle to put your fuel in, where are you going? I hope you're tracking with me today, because you and I need compassion. Anything that short circuits compassion is not good. We need to feel it, and it needs to compel us to do something, but the something that we do really matters. Because I think you'd agree that you can pour gas or fuel or whatever into an old broken down jalopy. Is it going to get you down the road to justice? It's not. It's not. So we've got to talk about effective charity. Effective charity. That's what we talk about when we're talking about the vehicle. So the vehicle that Marcia and I started in I guess we're in our 25th year of ministry now, is Watered Gardens Ministries. Watered Gardens Ministries in Joplin. I hope you'll come visit. You're not that far away. Would love to show you what's going on in Joplin at our brick and mortar ministries there. When Marcia and I started this ministry, we would get calls initially, and people would say, do you guys sell bird baths or lawn care equipment, or do you do landscaping, right? Because it's Watered Gardens. And we were like, oh no, God, you did give us this name. We know that. So, and of course, it always gave us an opportunity to share the passage from which the name of the ministry came, which is out of Isaiah chapter 58. It's a passage where God is really chastising his people for going through the motions rather than actually helping people who are struggling. And in one case, he even says, if you'll extend yourself to those who are in need or those who are hungry. And then there are promises. One of them is, then you'll be like a watered garden and like a spring whose waters never fail. It's a beautiful promise. So that was the vehicle. Watered Gardens was the ministry that was birthed out of compassion. And there was a lot of compassion that gave rise to a lot of charity. today, we have 4 different campuses that I'm not going to show you, but I'll just share with you real quickly. 4 different campuses in Joplin, an adult shelter. One, we've got a floor with men and then another floor with women. And we have a respite unit for people coming out of the hospital that don't have anywhere to go to finish recovery, because you know how quickly they want you out of the hospital, right? If you're in the hospital, then you got to get out. So we've got a respite unit, kind of looks like an ER, where people who have no home can come and finish their recovery. And a lot of other things are going on in that downtown center. We call it the Outreach Center right there. We also have a long-term residential recovery program called Forge. It's a tough one. So this is a 1.5-year commitment that guys make who are struggling in recidivism, on and off the streets, in and out of addiction, in and out of jail. And they need a heavy long-term investment of relationship and accountability. But they go through classes, education. We bridge them then into the workforce through partnerships that we've developed in our community with employers. That's our Forge program. Washington Family Hope Center is another building. We've renovated a 2-story school building to be a beautiful shelter for moms and kids. Moms with children who are struggling in homelessness, living in a car, or maybe in a very bad situation with nowhere to go, they can come into a beautiful facility called Washington Family Hope Center. And then Diane already mentioned our 4th campus, or our 4th property, which is the Worth Shop. And we call it the Worth Shop because we have learned that work awakens worth in people's lives. And this is a place where people earn the very basics that they need. Shelter, food, clothing, whatever it is. If you're able to do a little bit of something for something that you need, then you enter into exchange right there at our Worth Shop, crafting goods that go to market, helping in our recycling, whatever it might be. It could be 30 minutes, could be an hour, could be longer than that. When the Worth Shop took off, and mind you, initially, we were a handout ministry that just gave a bunch of stuff away. We were basically a redistribution center. We've developed a lot over the last 25 years. And when we got to the point of like launching the Worth Shop and that concept, adopting that philosophy, practicing that idea, there were a lot of people who were coming through our doors before that didn't come back. Thousands. How sad is that? I mean, it's not that we didn't care about them. Of course, there were too many to actually develop real relationships with all of them anyway, which is easy to do when you're in that kind of a ministry mode. But it was so sad that there were so many people that had kind of gotten trapped up in dependency with us, and now they were just going to look for wherever else they could go. So we launched this little local initiative way back in 2012 called True Charity. And the idea was, let's see if we can help educate our community and rethink about who the human person is. What is poverty, really? What is charity, and what should it really look like? Some of the things that you and I have been talking about today. So we began that movement, and now it's grown into a national movement of more than 200 churches and nonprofits across 32 states. And we're very excited about that. These are folks in general who are very interested in making sure their vehicles, if they're putting compassion into a vehicle that's actually effective, that's going to get down the road to helping people's lives turn to more what they ought to be than where they are right now. So very excited about the growth of this network just over the last few years. And a core piece to that for us is a workshop. So we'll be doing a community workshop here, not maybe in this building, but we'll be doing one in this community in April, I think. Is that April 29th? So we'll be having a community workshop right here, April 29th. Excited about that. And this is a report out of Chicago. That was our last workshop, I think, was in Chicago. But you have a report also. I think it's been handed to you. So that's a report for Rolla. Feel free to take a look at that. Well, I'm not going to go over any of those details there, but at our workshop, we'll dive a little bit deeper into it, okay? So I want to introduce some components of the workshop today. This is my objective. I thought if I can just give you some little nuggets of things that we would be talking about in the day of our workshop, I'll probably do a good job. And our workshop really is coming out of this book, The Tragedy of American Compassion. Has anybody read it? The Tragedy of American Compassion? Okay, one. Okay, very good. I would expect that from you, Deb. So Deb's read that. It's a great, great read. It is the history of charity and welfare in the United States. So it goes back into, I think mid-19th century and then on from there. It's a really, really great read. In one chapter of the book, Marvin Olasky outlines 7 marks of what he calls compassion. We call them 7 marks of effective charity. 7 marks of effective charity. And these are those marks. Now, in our workshop, and I hope you'll come, we will, it won't be me, it'll be actually a couple of other instructors, and I'll be here too. But we'll unpack all 7 of these through the day. So there are going to be deep dive lecture content, but then we'll also split that time with practical application. Because I think if you're like me, the last thing you want to do is show up to an all-day workshop where you get a bunch of head stuff and a bunch of stuff in a folder, and then you walk away, but you're like, how do I actually apply this, right? So we want to make sure that those who come to the workshop walk away with some really good stuff that they can put into practice. And today, I just want to spend a little bit of time on each one of these marks, but honestly, I won't get through them all. I'll just let you know. So we'll probably get through the first 3 or 4, and then we'll stop and do some Q&A. Sound good? Okay, let's do it. So the first one is affiliation. And this is really all about making sure that our charity doesn't take the place of what someone else should do. This is the idea of affiliation. It is to ask the question, who is most closely affiliated with the person that I'm about to help before I jump in and help the person? There was a guy years ago, I was at that particular point, we were all volunteers for the first 10 years of our ministry. I don't remember if it was probably back in that time frame, but I was sitting across the desk from a guy who had a need, and I don't remember what his need was. His name is John. I know his name. So John had a need, and I don't remember what the need was, but I remember asking him, "Where's your family?" And he said, "Oh, they're in California." I said, "Okay. Well, when's the last time you've been in touch with them?" "Oh, it's been a long, long time ago." "Well, do you think we could reconnect you with with your family?" And John said, "No way. They're not even going to want to hear from me. I mean, I have burned those bridges." And so we talked a little bit, and I said, "Well, what town are they in?" He gave me the town. I said, "What's your mom's name?" He gave me her name. I looked her up, and she pops on the white pages, and I turned my monitor around. I said, "You think this is her?" And he said, "Probably." I said, "Well, there's a phone number there. Can I call it? Do you mind?" He said, "No, I guess you go ahead and call it. She isn't going to want to talk to me." I call her. She picks up. I'm talking to John's mom. He hasn't spoken to her in years. And I'm telling her, "Yeah, your son is right here in this room with me. And we're having a conversation." "Oh, yeah, you can talk with him. Hang on a second. John, she wants to talk to you." I hand the phone over, and he and his mother have a conversation that they haven't had in years. And then a few weeks later, his sister flies in from California, and I'll never forget when she walked through the doors of our mission and greeted her long-lost brother, and they embraced. And then she took him home, went back to California. His mother sent a letter later that said, "Thank you for giving my son back to me." Amazing, beautiful story. And it all has to do with affiliation. Rather than me saying, "John, what's your need? Here you go. See you later." It was, let's talk about your family. Let's talk about who's most closely affiliated with you. Let's talk about who's most responsible to be involved in your care rather than just me. And so it's a great principle. And what I want to do, I may need to hang this up. We'll leave it like that. That way I can be right on it. But what I want to do is just read a little bit out of the book, because you're going to enjoy some of these findings. Now, Marvin Olasky, he's taking historical, he's doing all the research. He's finding the historical quotes of people back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Here we are on the idea of affiliation. And this is what Marvin writes. Mary Richmond, who, by the way, was well known as the founder of social work, okay? Mary Richmond of the Baltimore Charity Organization Society, the Baltimore Charity Organization Society, noted, quote, she said, "Poor neighborhoods are doomed to grow poorer and more sordid whenever the natural ties of neighborliness are weakened by our well-meant but unintelligent interference. That's tough, isn't it? I mean, that's so well said. Whenever the natural ties of neighborliness are weakened by our well-meant but unintelligent interference. So how do you and I strengthen these natural ties? How do we do that? Well, I think it's regarding the principle of subsidiarity. So I want to introduce this term to you. Again, in the workshop, we'll dive deep into a lot of this stuff. But I at least want to introduce the term subsidiarity to you. It's not a common term that's used. It's an organizing principle that matters ought to be handled by the smallest, lowest, closest, but most competent person or organization. That's the idea of subsidiarity. And basically, we'll often teach people, just think smaller, closer. Think smaller, closer when we're engaging folks who are struggling in poverty. Smaller, closer. I don't know if I have any Catholic friends in the audience, but I'm not Catholic, but I love reading some of the encyclicals, the writings of the popes. Some of them are fantastic. I've read Quadragesimo Anno by Pope Pius in 1931, and he actually brings out this idea of subsidiarity. And this is the way he put it. Just as it is gravely wrong to take from an individual what he can accomplish through his own industry and initiative and give it to the community, so also it is a grave evil and disturbance of right order to give to a larger association what a lesser and subordinate organization can do. Are you tracking with that? It's the idea, don't take from an individual what he can do and give it to the community, but don't take from the community what the community ought to do and go give it to a larger association. It's this idea of subsidiarity. I think if you and I will regard subsidiarity and this practice of affiliation, it could be a huge game changer in restoring some of the natural ties that make families and communities and our nation a healthy place to be. So at the end of each one of these, I've got a little challenge question. And here's our challenge question for today. Does our charity work to discover who is most closely affiliated with the person in need? Okay, that's our challenge question for affiliation. Can we do a few more of these? Are we good to do a few more? Okay, I'm going to kind of keep track on time. So let's do bonding. That's the next one, right? Prioritizing building relationships above meeting material needs, right? That's the whole idea of bonding. So we want to be good about that. And this is Gabe. Gabe's a recent graduate from our Forge program. So we just celebrated his graduation, and what a great guy and such an exciting future that he has now compared to where he was. Gabe was one of those guys, he didn't have many good affiliations. Because you and I know that, right? We know that affiliation is a nice thing and subsidiarity, okay, I'm getting it, but there are a lot of folks who really don't have healthy family members or healthy friends to connect them to. So what do? Well, we're going to have to bond. We're going to have to exercise this idea of bonding and building real relationships with people. Gabe was alone. He didn't have a healthy family. And he describes it as like a hole in his heart or a hole in his chest. Here's what he says. I was homeless on the street with a hole in my chest. That's what he said. I'd never done anything but do and sell drugs. I used to wake up and have to put a needle in my arm first thing. Now I wake up and talk with God. And I have so many people I can call on to, a faith community that's taught me lessons I'll hang on to for the rest of my life. Gabe needed those new relationships, and they were formed for him. It's fantastic. In The Tragedy of American Compassion, Marvin writes, charity volunteers a century ago usually were not assigned to paper pushing or mass food dispensing tasks, but were given the opportunity to make a large difference in several lives over several years. Like narrow but deep. Interesting, right? That's the idea of bonding. A colleague once told me, a person doesn't become homeless because he runs out of money. He becomes homeless because he runs out of friends, right? It's this idea of social capital. Are people really running out of friends? Is the U.S. Surgeon General right when he claims that there's an epidemic of loneliness? Have you heard that? An epidemic of loneliness. Well, I don't know if you can see this slide very well, but it says 58% of the U.S. population is lonely. They're reporting, self-reporting that they're lonely. Of those who make under $50,000 a year, 63%. So more who are under $50,000 a year are more lonely. 72% who receive Medicaid reported being lonely. So loneliness is on the rise, and it appears to affect the poor disproportionately. So it's worse for folks that we're working with. These numbers are a reflection of social capital, and really specifically bonding social capital. I don't know if you're familiar with the difference, but bonding social capital deals with relational connections within a particular social class, okay? Close friends that you hang with. Bridging social capital is the other type of social capital. Those are relationships that are developed across social classes. I hope that makes sense. I love this scatterplot graph. I know you guys are like, oh, James, no, you didn't do this to us after lunch. But I hope you can see it says economic connectedness on the x-axis, on the y-axis is upward income mobility. Every one of these dots represents a community, and within this community are a number of people, and they're all Facebook users. More than close to 80 million Facebook users. And this was an interesting research because all of these folks were poor initially, but in the communities where connections, Facebook connections, were with people who were from less affluent to more affluent, bridging social capital across social classes, they all rose. They actually ended up with a higher income mobility over time. So the more connected we are in our bridging social capital with people who may not be poor like us, the more of the chance we have of rising out of poverty. I think that's almost common sense, though, isn't it? If we have good relationships with some people who are not necessarily poor like we are, we're going to have a better chance at jobs and other opportunities because of that. So this was some interesting research that showed that. I wanted to share it with you. Little interlude music there. That was nice. And I think that church and other charitable institutions represent the greatest potential for the development of bridging social capital. I mean, think about it. We have a lot of great volunteers who are showing up here to be helpful, working right alongside people who need to know more about who they are and vice versa. And in the church, that would certainly be a great opportunity to build bridging social capital because the message that's being preached from the pulpit is not specific to some socioeconomic class. It is for the heart of people across classes. So I think the church and local ministries provides a great possibility for there to be the development of bridging social capital. We've even created a tool, Marcia and I did, called Life Deck. So we've had this out now for a number of years. But this will take a person and another person, and they get to know each other over a period of 40 weeks as they go through 20 different categories of life. And it's just a great way to build a relationship with a person and share back and forth about your thoughts on various things, from relationships to finances to church life to a lot of other things. So Life Deck is a tool that we created to help that. Here's your challenge question on bonding. Does our charity build social capital? We should be asking that. Does our charity build social capital? It's a good question to ask. When you come to the workshop, we'll talk about how to do it. How do we actually turn that dial up a little bit, where we make sure that the ministry we're involved in is building social capital? Hey, let's do another one. We've got time. At least one more, okay? Categorization is the next one. Assessing a person's uniqueness and willingness, categorization. Years ago, I was in Grand Rapids. So I ended up there traveling there now a little more frequently than back in that day. At that point, I think I'd only been there a few times. And it was for an event. Grand Rapids is a beautiful city right there on the river. And I stepped outside of the venue, and it's nighttime, and the dinner is over. And this woman comes around the corner, and she's very panicked. And she's got cutoffs on, and she runs up to me, and she says, "Sir, my kids are in a van right around the corner, and I just need a few bucks for gas. Could you just give me a few? I've got to get back to them really quickly. Could I just have a few bucks for gas? I'm trying to get gas. I got to get back to my kids." And now when I say that to you, you can sense the urgency in it, right? It's like, okay, there's a need here. And so you think that maybe there's a need for real relief here. Like, she's stranded, she needs gas, I ought to give her a few bucks. The thing that was interesting with her is she didn't realize that the year before, when I had been there, she had done the same thing to me. So I said, "Hey, I remember you. You did this last year. Same story." And anyway, she starts backing up, and I'm thinking, well, there's got to be a need. It's not what she's expressing, but there's some sort of a need. And I'm like, "Hey, I'm not going to bite. Let's talk. Let's just figure out what's really going on here." She's like, "I'm leaving," right? She goes into a bar, and I'm thinking, I think Jesus would probably go in to get her. And so I go in, and I go into the bar, and I'm looking around. I can't find her, and I'm asking the bartender, "Hey, this woman, she's short, red hair." And he's like, "Yeah, I don't know. The place is packed." And I'm like, "Yeah, there's a lot of people in here." And I'm telling him the story, and he says, "Oh, yeah, that stuff happens all the time. I park across the parking lot, and I would walk across the parking lot to work every night. I'd get hit up by the same guy with the same story every single night, until I finally took $5 out of my pocket. And I said, 'Buddy, if you'll just change your story, I'll give you $5 right now,' which I thought was interesting to incentivize a little creativity. I never did find her, went back to the hotel. I called Marcia, and I'm telling her the story, and she starts laughing. I'm saying, "Why are you laughing?" She said, "Well, how many husbands call their wives from 700 miles away to say that he's chasing a woman into a bar after being propositioned on the street?" And I said, "Yeah, that's true." We never did find her. But the reason I'm telling you this story is because initially it seemed like it was a relief type need, right? It seemed like it was a relief type need, but it wasn't. Relief is something that's urgent, that's needed right then. It's a one-way kind of a transaction, and that's it. And that's relief. And so I think the next slide I have will kind of take you through a little bit of what that looks like, okay? So relief is urgent and temporary provision of emergency aid. I'll read it in case those of you in the back cannot see it. That's it, right? One way, and it should be short-lived, and it is to kind of stop the bleeding. It's to stop the decline. You can see the orange line. It's to stop that decline, right? That's what that relief is intended to do. And then we need to shift it, folks. We've got to shift it from relief to rehabilitation. You'll read this in the book, When Helping Hurts, okay? You want to shift toward rehabilitation, trying to help a person get back to where they were before, okay? And then maybe even help them develop beyond that, increasing their capacity to withstand the next whatever happens, so that they don't crash and burn in the same way. That's the idea of development. Relief, rehabilitation, and development. So categorization is all about determining which type of charity is needed, because it's not all the same. So which type of charity is needed? Is it relief? Is it rehabilitation? Or is it development? We need to be asking ourselves that question. We should not limit the word charity to a handout. And rehabilitation and development, they require effort on the part of the recipient of that form of charity, which is not a bad thing, because work awakens worth in people's lives. We should remember that. Too often, we're looking at the need of the person as the only qualification for what kind of charity ought to be handed out. So we're saying, what do you need instead of what do you have? That's an important question, because what we need to shift into now when we're dealing with categorization is the idea of testing a person's willingness to actually be the leader in his or her journey out of poverty. How do you test willingness, right? We need to learn how to do that. Part of it is in recognizing that almost everybody has something to contribute. They've got some gifting, some skill. There's something that they can contribute to what's needed, to their own help that's needed. So we call one of these dysfunction-based categorization. This is when people are coming through our doors and we're saying, what do you need? What don't you have? What can't you do? Because we're here to help you. Now, I'm not saying we should ignore the hurdles or the need that's before us, but at the same time, I think we need to practice more so function-based categorization, which asks questions like, what can you do? What do you have? It's more production-centered. Does that make sense? That's function-based categorization. We should not forget that. And there's that other question. How do you know if a person is willing to apply that gifting or capacity and ability? How do you know that? Well, in The Tragedy of American Compassion, Marvin Olasky says, work tests. That's what they were called back then, work tests. Work tests were a key self-sorting device and one that also allowed dispensing aid while retaining dignity. By 1890, the recommendations were accepted throughout the United States. When an able-bodied man in almost any city asked an agency for relief, he was often asked to chop wood for 2 hours or to whitewash a building. Boy, they were tough back then, weren't they? But there was some sort of a work test that helped us understand, is this person willing to actually be a part of their journey out of poverty or not? And that's so important. You know why? Because you cannot dump enough aid or relief onto a person to lift him or her out of poverty. It does not work in developing nations. It does not work with people. You can't lift a person out of poverty. You walk alongside a person as they climb out of poverty, but you can't lift a person out of poverty. So our challenge question on this one, is our charity one size fits all, or does it consider individual and situational uniqueness? And then I'm going to skip ahead. I want to show one more slide to you, and then we'll do Q&A. So this is A, B, and C. I'm going to move ahead to, I think it's E, because I want to share this one thing with you. These are all the things that we'll get to share with you in more detail there. These 5 steps to dependency are so good, I just can't stop the day without sharing them with you. In the book Toxic Charity by Robert Lupton, he delineates these 5 steps to dependency. And Marcia and I realized we were really guilty of this. So we would give something to somebody once and they would appreciate it. Makes sense, right? And then when you give the same thing again, they anticipate it's coming a third time. If you give the same thing a third time, they'll have an expectation that it's coming a fourth time. If you give the same thing a fourth time, it could be rent, it could be food, it could be whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. You give it a fourth time, now there's a sense of entitlement that begins to develop. Like, I don't know why, but I must be entitled to this because you just keep giving it to me over and over. So entitlement will develop. I understand that. And then dependency is the 5th step. You know, at that point, people become dependent on you. Now, it may take more than 5 steps, but I do believe that is the trajectory, right? And we saw it in our own ministry for years. In my new book, The Crisis of Dependency, I outline what I think happens to givers, because I don't think it's just the poor who are impacted. I think our community is impacted. And so the giver feels a sense of exhilaration, right? It's like, oh man, it felt so good to give, right? It feels so good. And then if you give the same thing to the same person again, you're going to feel a little more useful to that individual. And then it'll progress to feeling necessary and then essential. And then there's a paternalism that develops. How sad that is that we see dependency, a codependency of sorts, really. It's a codependency. And sometimes that can happen between individuals. Sometimes that happens between a group of people and the state. Sometimes it can happen between people in a charity, but it can be a codependency that's unhealthy, that is a paternalistic and dependent kind of relationship. And so I think we have a crisis, right? So I think the next slide is the book. Yeah, so I think we have a crisis today in our nation. And let me just finish there because I want to take some Q&A. And I do want to jump ahead real quickly to a few slides that would be, so there's, again, our network. And I want you to join the movement. There's a movement of effective charity. And it's vitally important for the sake of our communities and for the sake of our nation that you and I are working together to transform the way charity is practiced in the United States. So I want your help with that. I'm asking for your help with that. So I'd love for you to be a part of the movement and to join our network. And in it, our network members receive model action plan access, like how do I take my Christmas giveaway program and turn it into a Christmas market? We've got the whole thing. We're bridging the ideas you and I have been talking about to very practical solutions in things like this. And we have a whole fleet of these model action plans that will be very helpful. How do I take my food pantry, turn it into a food co-op? I mean, so we're looking to transform the way charity is being practiced. These model action plans are very helpful. We have organizations across the United States. More than half of them have changed the way they're practicing charity through these types of tools. We need to get away from measuring outputs alone, where we're just talking about measuring the number of people coming through the door, how much food we gave away. Not that those are bad things to measure, but we need to measure outcomes of human impact. Are we helping people get a job? Are we building social capital? Are we furthering their education? Outcomes that are important to measure. And our outcomes toolkit helps organizations figure out how to do that. It's not easy to do, but we've got the way to get it done. And our toolkit helps with that. And we have a number of other toolkits as well. That's all about learning, but we also believe it's important to connect. So we have a summit where a lot of leaders come together. Some of you have been to that, and they connect. Or maybe at our different events that we have. Very excited about how we're bringing those folks together. And then finally, influence, right? Learn, connect, and influence. We want you to influence what's going on in our nation today and in your community as well. So we have a legislative survey that our members complete that we then push out to think tanks that then get them in the hands of policymakers so that the voice of folks on the ground who are actually fighting poverty and doing the work have an opportunity to share the truth for legislators to hear. And we're building that bridge to make sure that your voice is heard and that you have an ability to influence. We also have PSAs, billboards, and things like that are kind of stock. You can tailor them to your community so that you can help educate and influence your community about more compassionate ways to be, it's like coupling compassion and common sense. How do we bring those things together? So I hope you'll consider joining our network. I'd love to have you as part of the movement. Love to be working with you. Let me stop there and I'll try to answer some questions.
What happened to Mary?
So very interesting. Mary told us because of bonding, Mary said, if you ever had a woman's shelter, I'd come into it. So we built a woman's shelter. And on Thanksgiving night of, I think it was 2012, she came in off the streets for the first time in 3 years. And we actually had a recliner for her in the room. Everybody else had a cot bed, right? Or just a regular bed, a small bed, shelter bed. But she had to have a recliner because she still couldn't recline. And so then we had to lean the recliner back. Finally, we got her a big wedge pillow for the bed. We were able finally to get her to where she would sleep normally, but it took a long time to get her there. And then we were able to help her into some housing at some point after that. But she was with us for a long time. It wasn't 30 days and you're out. So it's that tailored investigative charity, like who are you as an individual? How can we best help you? And for Mary, she needed to be with us for a long time because she had a lot of struggles. So, yeah. Other questions? Oh, we've got time. Yes. Yes.
First of all, sometimes Jesus tells me to enter the bar too.
Yeah, is your wife here with you? Right? Okay, good. I just want to make sure. Okay. That's good. I like that. That's sisterly accountability right there. That's a good idea.
I have a question. I'm not real articulate, so bear with me because I'm going to...
Sure.
I understand your message a little bit is that small communities and local organizations are more effective in addressing the needs of people in poverty and need. And you've addressed our federal government with this. Do you think people in our federal government would receive your message as an invitation or an excuse to deny their responsibility to meet the needs of people in need? Do you understand?
Yeah.
Did I express that?
I think so. I think so. And I think it's, I don't think the responsibility thing is an on-off switch. I think that it's understanding the idea of subsidiarity and saying, wait a second, we're the larger association that should not interfere with what a lesser subordinate organization can do, right? So, like, for example, when the pandemic hit, the COVID-19 pandemic, right? I'm on a video call with a bunch of folks from around the city, and that whole topic came up of, is this a point where I believe, it was actually pointed to me, do I believe government should be involved? And I said, yes, I do. I think this is a worldwide pandemic, and if we need ventilators now, subsidiarity would say the larger association needs to get involved right now. So it kind of depends on the situation. In general, I think larger, more bureaucratic associations do not understand the individual on the individual level. And a good example is I've shared Mary and Joshua, two people who are chronically homeless. It's the Mary we've talked about, and how what would just passed with Grant's Pass case in Oregon, Supreme Court has said that communities are able to ban folks from sleeping in public places. And so there's, everybody has an opinion on this. And my op-ed was, it's not going to make the difference. That's not going to make the difference, because we have folks like Joshua who need a kick in the butt, because I know Joshua. And we have folks like Mary who do not need that. How do they know that? They're both chronically homeless on the street. The federal government nor the Supreme Court understand what's going on in those individuals' lives. I do, and you do. And so subsidiarity would say you and I need to be the ones who are working in that space more than a far removed source of help. I hope that makes sense. So I don't think it's an on-off switch. I think it really is just layering proper responsibility. Yeah. Yes.
How do you deal with the mental health crisis? So Josh or Ed, which is kind of a drug, hand in hand. So Josh is a good example. I mean, at what point you can't help them if there's a mental health crisis going on or drug addiction? So
yeah.
where does that play with your?
Yeah, well, I mean, like for us, and everybody handles this stuff differently. We have volunteer counselors, and we do kind of a layman's assessment of folks within the first week. They all get a medical screen and a mental health screen as they come in our doors. And then if the mental health screen hits a particular number, a counselor that's volunteer sees them. And then if it's needed after that, and this is a Christian volunteer that comes in and does that work for us. And then after that, they'll go to potentially a partnership that we have with our local hospital. And they have an urgent behavioral solutions department. And so that may be where we end up going to get some extra help that we need. So it's kind of layered like that. Does that?
Yeah, we may not have institutions like that here to help. It's an obstacle that we may have as well.
Absolutely. So I want you to join our network and get a hold of our mental health and trauma toolkit, because inside of it we have a lot of resources and a lot of examples and a lot of links that take you to other ideas and solutions. They're not in my mind right now, but we've got a whole toolkit that's just built for that, because the need is so great. We're seeing more and more of it. And I think you all know that, and certainly Marcia and I see it at our mission as well. So we built a toolkit just to be helpful with that. Yes?
So we all know that there are people who want to make better decisions versus people who maybe do not want to make better decisions. So I think the story was young man Joshua.
Yes. Yes.
So what would be your view of percentage that you see of people in your network, of people who really do want help and will follow a process? Everybody in this room has dealt with people who's like, well, can we help you with this? And they're like, no, I tried them last time. They treated me wrong.
Yeah.
They're only in it for themselves. Whatever their answer is. Where do you see that at? Is that a...
Yeah, I mean, it's not healthy right now. And I think you can look at things like the labor force participation rate is continuing to drop. And we see that on a day-to-day basis in our mission. And I think across the nation, a lot of nonprofits are seeing the same kind of struggle with people who are not necessarily wanting to take the challenge, even though we know that challenge develops. They're not wanting to move in that direction. So I was reminded of something that was written on the back of some of those charity organization society pamphlets long ago. Intelligent giving and intelligent withholding are alike true charity. Sometimes it is like, Joshua, we're not going to give that to you today. There's something better, right, for you to do. Now, if our community gets on board with this idea of being investigative, being led with compassion, understanding what's going on in the individual's life, applying a work test, finding out that this person is not willing and doesn't want to, understanding that we can't dump enough charity or aid on that individual that's actually going to help them out, then we have to take our hands off until the person wants to take advantage of the developmental or rehabilitative program that's actually going to help them up and out. If our whole community gets on board with that, then you see more of an interest in taking the offer of opportunity. See, we talk a lot about service provision. We need to get all of our services together, be a better collective for service provision. I say we need to be opportunity providers. Opportunity provision is different than service provision because opportunity requires that the recipient applies some effort and takes advantage of that opportunity. And so, yeah, that's what I would say. Right now, it's a 75-25. I think it's tough. It's tough. Depends on where you are and what sector you're working, I think. But among the homeless population, it's very difficult right now. There are a lot of ways to stay alive in the situation that you're in, depraved though it may be, that does not require effort. And we need to, with compassion, apply challenge and expect effort from people at the right time. My background's in physical therapy. I'll finish with this last story for you. My background's in physical therapy. I practiced for, probably a dozen years. Really through the first 10 years of our ministry, I was still practicing physical therapy as well. And I would be called sometimes a physical terrorist. Now, that wasn't just me. I mean, I don't think I'm really I wasn't a mean physical therapist, but physical therapists are physical therapists, and sometimes they're called physical terrorists, right? Because it doesn't feel good. So I want you to consider if I walk into a hospital room with an 85-year-old grandmother who's just had a hip surgery. It's day 2 post-op. The doc wants me to get her out of bed. And what they're not expecting me to do is go in and scoop her up out of bed, kiss her on the forehead and set her in the chair and walk away. That's just not what physical terrorists do, right? I'm gonna coach her. I'm gonna encourage her. You can do it. You can do it. Bend your knee, press your heel into the bed, grab hold of that rail, roll. Come on, you can do it. You can do it, right? That's what we're doing. She's working hard just to get sat up at the side of the bed. Why? Because if I don't challenge my patients to develop the mobility and the strength they need to escape their bed of infirmity, they'll remain there until they perish. Same thing. If we do not at the right time with compassion implement challenge to develop the strength and mobility of people who are stuck in poverty, they will remain in their beds of poverty until they perish. So I hope you're on board with me at looking how we can better what we're doing to help people struggling. God bless you guys. Thank you so much. It's been good to be with you.